and that's the softball team here at South Carolina. Coach Ashley Chastain-Woodard doing an amazing job, robbed of SEC Coach of the Year, but has taken the Gamecocks to just their third appearance at the Super Regionals, and they have a chance to make history by going to the Women's College World Series for the first time ever. So Michael's going to join me to talk about that matchup with UCLA. Very excited to get to talk about that one. All types of stuff to get to today. Some fun NBA basketball last night. The Thunder. Woo! Pretty good. Pretty good. And later on in the second hour of the show, have a little bit of a disagreement with my man Mike Greenberg on the era of the NBA that we're in. So we'll get into that later. No Jay versus the internet today, but if you do go at 1075 The Game on Twitter, you can find where we are doing Elijah versus the internet. Dangerous game. I'm going to try to take Jay Phillips, receive the torch that Jay Phillips passes to me, and try not to go 1-2 with it, because that's what he did last night. And not looking very good for Jay. So I'll update you on all of that as well. But we need to go ahead and start about the 11-3 loss last night in Hoover. South Carolina season done. There's not going to be any postseason. First losing season, I believe, since 1996, which I was 1 year old. A lot of people listening to this weren't born. And a lot of people listening to this remember that. But that was the last losing season. You finished 28-29, 6-25 in SEC play if you count the SEC tournament losses. A lot of people don't. I do, just from my personal record book. It was a disastrous season, and it has now come to an end. And there's going to be a whole lot of talk about where this team goes from here. But to talk about the game last night, I think Paul Maneri maybe took the words out of my mouth in terms of this game, how it went last night, really being a microcosm of the entire season.
Well, I thought we'd have a tough game today. Obviously, Florida's got outstanding players, and got off to a start. They were basically letting nobody out in the first inning, and they only could get one run out of it. And they turned around and hit the 3-run home run, and after that, a couple more home runs. And we had opportunities, just couldn't capitalize on them. So in the end, it's kind of the story of our season, really. The other team hit home runs. We didn't hit any, or haven't hit many. And, we left a lot of runners on base. Ultimately, the better team won.
Yeah, last night, if you had a 2025 South Carolina Gamecocks baseball bingo card, really checked a lot of the boxes, right, in terms of things that have plagued this team all season long. So let's start here. Give up 10 runs in a game. Check. Happened a lot this year. Strand 10 runners on base. Check. ERA over 9 in the last 3 innings of an SEC game. Check. Committing multiple errors in the field. Check. A lot of things that many of the things that have plagued this team. Obviously, a lot of things plague you when you go 6-24 in the regular season in the league, and you're a 500 team with most of the wins you're getting in the regular season coming against mid-major opponents in midweeks. So things obviously weren't going very well, but seemingly everything that went wrong this season went wrong last night in Hoover. Minus a freak injury. We didn't have that. That's the one thing that if you had on your box, because this team did have some bad injury luck at the beginning of the year, if you had that on your bingo card, sorry, you can't check that one off, but you can check off just about anything else that happened. This team just kind of went out the way they played all year. Not great in the field. Inconsistent starting pitching. Relief pitching, giving up runs. Stranding a ton of runners on base, even when you do hit the ball really well, not being opportunistic at the plate and leaving a lot of runners on base. At different points this year, those different things kind of plagued this team. And it all kind of happened last night. It all showed itself as really what the perfect encapsulation of the 2025 baseball team was. Find it kind of ironic that they went out the way they played most of the year, and the result, it's the worst season in SEC play since they joined this conference. It's brutal. And now, when preparing for this show earlier today, I said I expect Paul to be back, and about as soon as I write that down in pen, Jordan K. from the State has his story where he confirms that Paul Mainieri will be coming back. Because, again, Terry and I talked about it. It's incredibly expensive. I know fans, based off of the Twitter poll that we've run, also at 107.5 The Game, it's pinned to the top of the profile, so feel free to chime in on that. A lot of people that we hear from, a lot of you guys that comment and interact with us on a daily basis, A, thank you. B, want wholesale change and are very eager to press that reset button, and I totally get it, right? With a program like this, with the championships you've won, in the sustained level of success that you've had that has spanned decades, seeing a year like this is incredibly difficult, and it feels like a nightmare you can't wake up from. But when it comes down to the question that Jay and I have kind of proposed a lot throughout this year, as it pertains to what the future of the coaching staff looks like, it boils down to, can you afford to do it, and can you afford not to do it? And I think the answer that we got to that question is what we got today. You can't afford to do it. There's only so much money to go around in college baseball because of just kind of where it is on the totem pole, that getting $8 million or so to get rid of the staff and then having to get all that money to bring in a new staff and then still have enough money to build a team that's going to be competitive to where you want it to be next year, incredibly difficult. Incredibly difficult. So I'm not really sure what the team's going to... No one knows what the team's going to look like, or if you're even expecting anybody to come back that played on this team this year. You hope Bo Hollins can come back because you saw a lot from Bo throughout the course of the year. You saw a lot from KJ Scobie. You like what you have there. A couple of guys with eligibility that can maybe help you. I know Nathan Hall's a junior, and Nathan had a really solid season despite kind of how it ended. So you'd like to have some of those cornerstone guys back, and later on in this hour, I'll discuss why having some of those cornerstone guys back and retaining the talent that you like this year is going to be really, really important. Like, you're going to have to recruit the best players on your own team this year almost as hard as you're going to have to attack the portal, right? But last night, before the news was announced that Paul Mainieri is expected to be back for next year and the entire coaching staff expected to be back for this year, Paul was asked about that last night, fresh off of the loss to Florida, and here was his initial response.
No, Terry Rooney is here to stay. He's an outstanding coach, great recruiter, great pitching coach. You do the best you can, and we'll get better. We need to. We had some young kids, I think, that showed flashes of being pretty good for us, and we're going to get some kids in recruiting, and we've got a couple of freshmen coming in that I think are going to help us. And Terry Rooney is here to stay. He's not going anywhere. He's an outstanding coach, and he'll prove that as we go forward. And there won't be any other changes with our staff.
And then shortly after that, he was asked if he has the support of the administration.
Yes. Very simply, yes.
Short and sweet. He says, yes, absolutely yes. And I understand this team was never supposed to be a national title contender or an SEC contender by any means, right? Because if you were expected to be so, you wouldn't have been voted 15th in the preseason coaches poll. Like, that was the expectation. Now, if anything, technically speaking, you can say you played to your league expectations, but those expectations aren't the expectations here, right? You brought back a lot of guys that you liked from last year's team that were productive. Ethan Petrie's always going to give you something, especially when it comes to hitting home runs and being one of the better power hitters in the league. But even though you weren't expecting them to be a contender this season, they should not have been this bad. And there is tons of blame to go around. How equally you want to give the pieces of this blame pie, that's up to you. Because there's plenty of it to go around. But there was zero excuse to only win 6 SEC games this year. And we've talked a lot, extensively on this show, about how we got here. The slow burn that was this baseball program, going from the top of the sport to now hanging out in the basement of the SEC. And we can talk about that all day, but the fact of the matter is, you're in the basement. And right now, you've got a cot down there, and you don't want to sleep there more than one night. And in college athletics, what it used to be, in terms of rebuilding, it used to be a slow, gradual process, right? When there wasn't as much of an influx of transfers and new players and total roster overhauls that we see year in and year out, it used to look a lot different than what it does now. So examples that you can have before, say, 2019 of teams that rebound from a year like this, oftentimes it's not immediate the next year, but there's signs of growth, right? It's like from going from the basement all the way to the penthouse suite by taking the stairs, right? So it can be slow and gradual, and it can feel like a slog, and your legs are burning because that's a lot of stairs, man, to climb. But while you're climbing those stairs, you're seeing the gradual signs of progress, and you see teams maybe go from 6 conference wins to 12 and just missing out on the NCAA tournament, then going from 12 to maybe 17 and making the NCAA tournament, and then maybe the next year getting like 19 and then getting to the supers. Like that, you would see that type of slow trajectory. But now it's a lot different, right? The examples of turnarounds can be instant, and there are 2 examples of teams in your league that traditionally you never thought of maybe as competitors in terms of programs, right? Sustained success. Teams that you expect to host a regional year in and year out, or teams that you would expect to go to supers, because those schools had other priorities too, and maybe just didn't invest financially and emotionally into the sport of college baseball the same way you once did. But now those 2 programs are ahead of you. And those 2 programs are top 10 in the RPI. They might even be top 5. I need to refresh my RPI list here. They might be top 5, and they are, actually. They're 1 and 2. And they've passed you. One of them was bad as of 2023. The other was really bad last year. Those teams didn't have to take the stairs to get to the penthouse. They built an elevator. So if we want to feel good about this program moving forward, this team can't take the stairs. They have to take an elevator. And they're going to have to build an elevator. Can they do it? This offseason, we're going to find out. But these 2 examples I alluded to, I think are really good blueprints to how you can get there. And on the other side, I'll tell you who those 2 schools are and how they installed an elevator to get from the basement to the penthouse suite. All that and more. You're listening to Wednesday's Postgame Show. The South Carolina Gamecock baseball program is in the basement of the SEC. And yesterday, the season ended with an 11-3 loss to the Florida Gators. And it leaves us now to see where this team and this program goes from here. And earlier in the show, hi, this is Postgame Show. I'm Elijah Campbell, joined by Elijah Campbell. It's just me today. But I mentioned there were two programs that have passed South Carolina, and they've done so in the modern age of college baseball. And I'm using modern age as just the NIL transfer portal beginnings, right? Because if you were, pre-2019, if you were, say, in the basement of the SEC, sometimes it'd be really hard to get back up to the penthouse. You'd have to take the stairs. It's the only way. But because of the advent of the transfer portal and NIL, for some teams, that has allowed them to build something more resembling an elevator to get you from that bottom floor to the top in a significantly faster process. And two programs within your league, who I would consider historically below South Carolina, from 2023 to now, have built elevators. And that would be Auburn and Georgia. And those elevators worked pretty well, man. We saw what Georgia did last year. We saw what Charlie Condon became. Well, they're the number one team in RPI right now. And then Auburn, who, outside of Missouri, the worst teams in the SEC last year, second in RPI right now. Georgia won 18 league games. Auburn won 17. So I went and looked and took a pretty big deep dive into what these schools did in terms of what their roster looked like from one year to the next, especially in their big leap year, right? For Georgia, the leap came from 2023 to 2024. For Auburn, it came from 2024 to 2025. So I looked at both teams in the year where they made the leap and looked at their six best hitters from OPS, and then the three starting pitchers, what you would consider like your weekend rotation. And I just wanted to see how many of them were players that were on the team previously. So how much do you have to rely on the transfer portal? Like Seth texted in our text line, our Firehouse Subs text line, 803-404-6100 if you want to weigh in. He says, have to get a stud transfer portal catcher, multiple arms to the mound, and two great hitting corner outfielders. Feel good about the infield with Hollins, Naraki, Kaz, and Scobie. And what Seth alludes to is a foundation, is bringing back at least a foundation of players. And that's something you're going to see as a theme here when I read this off to you. So for Auburn, with their best hitters this year, number one in OPS, Chris Rembert, a true freshman. So he is playing his very first college baseball season, but it wasn't like he was a top 50 national prospect. Perfect Game had him ranked at number 127 and as the number 4 shortstop in the state of Florida. Having an awesome year this year, 10 home runs, over 1,000 OPS. Ike Irish, who is having a phenomenal season, potentially an All-American. This is his third year at Auburn, so he was a holdover from the 2024 team last year, also coached by Butch Thompson. They did not fire Butch Thompson. They kept Butch, and they made some changes, and they're having the year they are now. But Ike Irish, this is his third year at Auburn, and right now hitting over 1,100 OPS with 16 home runs and batting .354. It's pretty good. And then you have Cooper McMurray, also over 1,000 OPS. He's a redshirt senior. He was one of the best hitters statistically for Auburn last year. So that's two guys that were on the team before that. Eric Guerrera, he's a sophomore. Missed much of last season with an injury, so this is really his first full season. He's a holdover. Lucas Steele, a junior, had 2 years at Samford, where he was productive. The OPS was about .864 and hit 13 home runs, was the freshman of the year in the SoCon in 2023, but that was a productive transfer. He came in to Auburn, elevated his game, elevated the team. Chase Fralick, a freshman. He also, like Chris Rembert, was not a top 50 recruit or top 100 recruit. He was number 114 nationally per Perfect Game and was considered the number 2 catcher in the state of Georgia. Now we look at Auburn's pitching staff. Samuel Dutton, who I believe leads the team with strikeouts. Got 89 strikeouts this year, but was an LSU transfer. Only pitched in 27 innings last year and had a .586 ERA. But they brought him into Auburn, and he is clearly developed, right? He's the ace pitcher on the number 2 team in RPI in America. Christian Chatterton, another freshman. Auburn relied on a lot of freshmen this year, and those guys stepped up immediately. Now, Chatterton, unlike the other 2 freshmen, was a more highly regarded prospect coming out of high school. He was at number 65 and was considered the number 2 right-handed pitcher in the state of Alabama. He's having a fantastic year. His whip is just a smidge over 1, and he's got 60 strikeouts. And then you have Cade Fisher. Cade Fisher, transfer from Florida, had a rough year last year, 7.13. Is better, but still not great with his ERA this year, which is 5.35. And he struck out 42 batters. But that's another transfer. Auburn's fascinating because out of all those 9 players I mentioned, 3 of them are transfers that they got in the transfer portal this past offseason. 3 are true freshmen that they got in the offseason. And then 3 of those players were from the previous year's roster. So they improved the roster with transfers by adding a couple of key players, but they retained a lot of their best players, and those players got better from 24 to 25. And I know they put a lot of faith in those freshmen, but they recruited at a high level at the high school ranks, and those guys made immediate impacts. Now if you look at Georgia in 23 and what their best players were in 24, by using the same logic I used with Auburn, Charlie Condon, obviously a top 5 draft pick last year, was already at Georgia as a redshirt freshman, so he really only had 1 full season of baseball under his belt. Corey Collins was at Georgia as a junior. Paul Totes was at Purdue as a really productive junior. Slate Alford was at Mississippi State as a productive sophomore. Fernando Gonzalez was already at Georgia, so he was a holdover with experience. Then Dylan Goldstein, Florida Atlantic, a very productive junior. And then the pitchers, Leighton Finley, was a freshman at Georgia who just struggled mightily, but improved a whole lot in 24. Christian Maracna was a senior, productive career at George Mason. He was a 5th-year guy, spent his entire career at George Mason, so he was very seasoned, had a lot of experience. Came in, helped Georgia's pitching staff mightily. And then Colton Smith, who was a freshman at Georgia the year prior, but struggled a lot, really took his licks in his freshman year. And out of those 9 players, none of them were true freshmen, so a little different than Auburn. 3 of those players, however, were in at least their 2nd year of playing SEC baseball. 4 of those 9 were transfers. 5 total were holdovers that improved. And those were holdovers from a different coaching staff. Mind you, Georgia fired their coach, brought in Wes Johnson. Wes Johnson brings in 4 of those transfers, but the 5 holdovers that he kept more than 5, but those 5 players specifically made significant leaps in that offseason, became significantly better players. So knowing all of that, I kind of reached the conclusion that the best thing you can do right now is retain your best talent. You have to be able to do that. Kind of like what Seth said, is getting the players you feel good about right now. I feel good about Bo Hollins. I feel good about, KJ Scobie. Henry Kazmar ended up playing really well down the stretch. There are guys that do have eligibility left that can be solid players next year because you saw the glimpses from them this year, but you need to solidify the roster. So the high school players that are going to be brought in next season are going to be called upon to produce because you can't just do it completely through the transfer portal. You're going to, if you want to use at least the Auburn route to help build your elevator back to the penthouse of the SEC, you're going to have a couple of those guys help you right away, especially if you whiff on a lot of transfers. So they got to produce. You got to bring in some transfer talent. Now, with the amount of retention this year's team's going to have, I don't know. I have a feeling there's going to be a clearing done on this roster, and they're going to try to overhaul it. So there's going to be a lot more reliance on transfers than maybe Auburn and Georgia had. But you got to hit on those. Get at least maybe 4 major impact guys that you can trust to be a top 6 hitter in your lineup or a weekend starter. But the biggest thing is development. Ike Irish is the best hitter for Auburn. He developed from the bad year in 24 to now having the year he is, potentially an All-American in 25. We saw what Charlie Condon did at Georgia. You have to have somebody that's a holdover make that jump, and you have to develop them. And that's the one thing with the staff that you really need to see is that they need to be able to develop these guys over the course of an offseason now. Because that's kind of the world we live in college sports, where living and dying by the transfer portal. can be a pretty dangerous game. Can be a pretty hard thing to do. It's risky. It's an option you have, and it's a pathway to maybe installing that elevator to get back up to the top that we talked about, as opposed to taking the stairs. Because as good of a fan base as this is, and as great of a college baseball town and state as this is, I don't think many people have the patience to take the stairs. And I don't blame them, especially after the year that you had this year. Gamecock Central's Jack Veltri, good friend of the show, going to join us next, give his postmortem on the season, his thoughts on how everything ended last night in Hoover, and the future of this program. This is the Postgame Show. And we are talking about the conclusion of the South Carolina Gamecocks baseball season. They fall to Florida in Hoover. They are one and done in the SEC tournament. And now it means it's time to look ahead. and reflect on the season. We can do two things at the same time. We're multifaceted. So we all went to multimedia journalism, looking forward and looking back. It's multitasking. And joining me right now on the way back from Hoover, my man, Jack Veltri, always kind enough to take some time to talk some ball with us here on this show. Jack, what's the report on the drive? It hasn't bored you to tears yet, has it?
No flat tires this time.
Yes.
No issues on the road. And I'm probably about halfway into the ride right now. How about 2.5 hours left to go? So I need to stop for gas at some point. But the ride has been smooth, man, and it's even better now that I get to talk to you for a little bit.
Absolutely. All wins are good wins. We celebrate all wins around here. But, Jack, I'll go ahead and start off really with some of the reporting that's been done today. Jordan Kay, I saw his tweet where, he confirmed that Paul Mainieri will be the head coach of this baseball team next year, and the coaching staff is going to be retained. I will start off with A, does that surprise you? And B, what does that say about maybe the rebuilding job that this coaching staff is going to be undertaking going into next season?
Yeah, I'm not really surprised at all, to be honest. I definitely expected Paul to be back next year, but the coaching staff in general, you would think maybe there might be a change or so, and again, we will see what happens. The offseason's literally just started, but we do know Paul's going to be back next year, and he's made it clear that his coaching staff is going to remain the same, barring anything unforeseen happening. Now, in terms of the job that they have at hand, it's a big one that they have to undertake. Like you said, they have to really reconstruct this roster and make it to where they're not just flipping a roster here in the off season. You can go out and get whatever players you want, to just fill out spots, but that's not your goal. You're trying to make this an even stronger roster, and as Paul Mainieri has mentioned many times, they need more talent. That's the way he's put it this season, and that's what he's going to go out and try to get, and they've done that so far in JUCO and high school recruiting, and we'll see how that all pans out. But there's also the portal here, which opens up on June 2nd, and there's going to be a lot of spots to fill on this roster, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I have a feeling the number's going to be really low in terms of maybe retention. That happens a lot in sports in general, right? In college sports, if you have a really bad year like they did, and the promises of cleaning house are they're made, but I was talking earlier, Jack, about maybe kind of like the resurgence of Georgia and Auburn and trying to find maybe some similarities in how they were able to turn their programs around. One did it with a coaching change, one did not, but the common denominator is that, yes, both brought in transfers, and those transfers have helped, but the emergence of players that were already on the roster made a big difference. For Auburn, it's Ike Irish, right? The kid's got potential to be an All-American. And last year for Georgia, it was Charlie Condon, who turned himself into a top 5 pick in the MLB draft, and a guy who put up video game numbers throughout the course of an entire season. You look at this roster right now, the ones we've talked about a lot are Bo Hollins and KJ Scobie because they played really well as freshmen. What are your thoughts on the possibility of Carolina to be able to retain those players, and do you see any of the guys that you think are coming back next year having the ability to make a jump somewhat in the ballpark of what Condon and Irish did in those seasons?
I think it's of the utmost importance to find a way to be able to retain these key freshmen that Paul Mainieri's talked about, that he feels good about retaining, as in Bo Hollins and KJ Scobie. But what about some of the other guys, like a Zach Russell who throws 94, 95? You have a guy like Gavin Braylon who started a handful of games at catcher this year as a freshman, and he's got some growing pains to go through right now, but maybe he's your guy moving forward if he can take that next step. So the importance of that is massive, because what does that say about your program if you're able to retain those key guys that had very good seasons, especially Bo and KJ, that are the corner infield spots that are so huge at first base and third. But at the same time, what does it say if you aren't able to bring them back? What does that say about the culture and why those guys left? Like, can you imagine for a second, hypothetically, if a guy like Bo Hollins, a legacy guy whose dad and uncle played here, he's a local kid from Lexington, just decides to leave and enter the transfer portal? So what does that say about your program there? But on the flip side, as I said, it's good if you're able to bring those guys back, and it gives you pieces to build around for the future. So I feel like there is a chance they could definitely come back. I would feel a lot more confident about Bo just because he is the local guy and stuff. But, again, you got to get guys to buy into what you're trying to sell for the future of this program, because right now it does look pretty bleak after the season that you had here.
Yeah, that kind of leads me to this too. I mean, you saw what the crowd was like, or maybe a lack thereof, in terms of attendance for the LSU series, and we're not blaming anybody here. I mean, the product is what the product is, and LSU kind of took the place over almost, and it wasn't the best of weekends from the optics standpoint, right? But one way to get people back is to put together an entertaining product out on the field, and that's going to be with the guys that you bring in. So when you look at maybe the high school recruiting class or the JUCO class, are there any players that stand out to you that might be able to have an instant impact in year one? Because Auburn banked on a lot of those guys this year in terms of true freshmen who've came in and have really helped turn that thing around.
There are definitely a few guys in the upcoming portal, or not portal, but JUCO and high school ranks that I feel like are going to be able to make an impact. And, Dawson Harmon's a guy that is actually buddies with Ethan Petrie, and he, from Florida, he played JUCO this year, put up some really good numbers power-wise. And I think he's just one of the examples of what Paul Mainieri seemingly is looking for in terms of guys that he's bringing in. Like, he's looking for players that can hit for power, and that's what we're seeing so far in JUCO in terms of hitting. Now, I know in high school they're bringing in a lot of pitching, so they're kind of going after what they say they are in terms of they want guys that can hit for some pop, but also guys that throw hard. Now, throwing hard doesn't necessarily equate to being a great pitcher. You have to have good command and good off speed. But as a hitter, if you are hitting for power, that's great, but you need to be able to hit good pitching and put the ball in play and not strike out half the time or whatever, So I like what they're doing so far in there. It's just also a matter of, okay, how is that going to translate over to Division I SEC baseball? And that's why I feel like it's so important to not just fill out your roster with those guys, but go into the transfer portal and get guys that have proven they can already go out there and do it.
And then when we kind of reflect on this year, too, I said earlier in the show, Jack, I don't think this roster was 6-24 bad. Like, I didn't expect them to win the SEC. I didn't really expect them to be in the top half of the SEC. But if you'd have told me that they would have gone 6-24 in league play and then 0-4 against Clemson and North Carolina, I don't know if I would have believed you, because I didn't think the roster was that, right? So in your mind, if we had to point out, I guess, one thing that made this team underachieve, what is the thing that you're kind of looking at?
I think if you wanted to just point out the fact that the hitting or the offense just wasn't very good, that's fair. I think that's one way you could definitely go with it. But honestly, I'll start at the top. I don't think the job that it starts at the top with everything, right? I don't think the coaching has been necessarily great this year. And, Paul Mainieri had a large undertaking coming in, taking over a program that at the time he did not believe was in the doldrums, and I don't think it was, because this was a pretty solid team last year up until the end of the 2024 season when they lost 6 in a row heading into Hoover. But this program now is in a much worse state than I think anyone could have imagined. And so, I was very high on the hire when Paul was brought in, but to kind of see things collapse the way it has with some of the things that you hear going on internally, whether it's accurate or not, or just some of the situational management things that are going on during a game, you kind of just scratch your head like, what are we doing here? So I think it does start at the top with him, but obviously there are issues far beyond what Paul Mainieri is doing. Again, I think he is trying to do the best he can with what he's got, and we'll see if he can really bring in his own guys to try and turn this thing around, which I'm interested to see happen. But again, this year there were so many other problems that it's not just him, but obviously he's at the top of it, and he's going to have to, he takes the most blame amongst anyone.
At Jack T. Veltri. Hit him up on Twitter for all of his coverage. Did a fantastic job with this team this year. Jack, appreciate your time as always, brother. Safe travels back home, and knock on wood that we have no issues with tires this time.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me. I'll talk to you later.
Good stuff there from Jack. When we return, we'll wrap up hour number 1 with some of your thoughts on our text line, our Firehouse Subs text line, 803-404-6100. You're listening to the Postgame Show. Taking your thoughts and reaction here this first hour of the Postgame Show on the conclusion of the South Carolina baseball season. Some of you have weighed in. I know Rick just texted right now. He says, I'm watching Tennessee and Alabama play. I love Carolina baseball, and frankly, I've not seen Carolina compete to the level of baseball we are known for in a few years. I guess since Ray became the AD. I don't understand coaches saying basically he had a lower level of players. Paul had a losing season his first year at LSU. The second year was much better. In my mind, he's got next year to get us back to the tournament and advance, or he needs to find somewhere else to go. I mean, and next year's going to be a big year for Paul. Now, Paul doesn't have a ton of coaching years left. I think he made that pretty clear when he took this job that this is the last stop for him, right? And one thing about guys like Paul Mainieri, who have done a ton of winning, right? When you win a national championship, when you go to Omaha as frequently as he did, if you won as many SEC championships as he did, you know those guys are competitors. And I know he really does not want to go out like this. And I think there's going to be a lot invested from him in the offseason because there really needs to be. And in terms of the turnaround, yeah, his first year at LSU, there was some struggle. There was an element of program building. Again, pre-2019, let's just say, you had to be a lot more patient with rebuilds, right? And I think we all know exactly what the modern college sports landscape is right now, where like rebuilds can happen in a year. I used the analogy earlier in the show that the old way of rebuilding sometimes did feel like you're going, from the basement of the building to the very top to the penthouse by just taking the stairs. Now, some people could run up the stairs and get there a little faster. Exhausting. Don't recommend. But you can see signs of progress, but it could take a while. NIL and the transfer portal, kind of like an elevator, right? It can happen faster. We've seen Auburn and Georgia use that blueprint to make things a little faster. In terms of seeing where everybody's at right now, in terms of how you're feeling about the future of the program, we asked on our poll question today at 107.5 The Game, now that the season's over, how do you feel about the baseball program? Needs a total reset now? Disappointed but patient? Or patient for now? And we've got 210 votes, so it's a pretty good sample size here, but 71% say total reset now. 21% are disappointed but patient, and I think that's where maybe Rick would fall in this category here, maybe understanding that it might benefit Paul being in year 2 here, and then 8% are patient for now. And I understand the lack of patience just because of how we've seen other teams be able to turn things around. And this program, and Jack mentioned it too, alluded to something Paul said in his introductory press conference last year, that this program's not in the doldrums. That's what he said. He said he came here. This is a house with good structure and good bones to it. But what happened this year was unacceptable. Again, I mean, didn't expect to contend for a national title, but you also didn't expect to lose more games this year than you won. So thanks for chiming in there on the text line, Rick. Jeff might fit in that same category. He says, I can't get behind firing coach after one season. Next year, we have to be a host for a regional, or we will have to see wholesale change. And, Jeff, that makes a lot of sense, man. Next year's going to be a very big year for this baseball program in more ways than one. Hour number 2 coming up. The Athletic released some fun list of the best players, coaches, and teams in college football in the last 25 years. We'll discuss. Hour number 2 here of the Postgame Show. I'm Elijah Campbell, and it will just be me hanging out here on the show this afternoon. No Jay today or tomorrow, but he'll be back in the saddle on Friday once he returns from his trip. First hour talked a whole lot of Carolina baseball, and of course, we've taken your thoughts on this too, whether it be on our Twitter feed at 1075 The Game or the Firehouse Subs text line, 803-404-6100. And we also have old school phone. You can just call in if you wanted to say anything, like our boy Justin has done right here. Same number. Justin, appreciate you calling as always, man. You doing all right?
I'm doing good, Elijah. How about you?
I can't complain. We're hanging in there, still here.
Hey, listen, like you said, man, soccer and baseball, you can't take shortcuts. You gotta take the big steps forward before you take shortcuts. And you might. And we got to get back to Omaha at some point because I think it's a big year for Paul Day, and he knows the expectation at soccer. It's not gonna be easy, but you gotta put a good crew class in. Chessboard were very good to get there. And before I go, Elijah, I don't know North Carolina should join the SC or not, but we'll see if they feel like it, you know. And peace out, Elijah. Go Gamecocks.
All right. Great hearing from you, buddy. Good to hear from you as always. So, yeah, I mean, I'll address the first thing first with the baseball team, and then we'll get to the North Carolina thing, which is fascinating, just because the position they're in. And now that Bill Belichick is their head football coach, and he's got a girlfriend about 40 years, his junior, who has seemingly grabbed a lot of control there. That has become more soap opera than college athletics. But with the baseball team, too, you're right. I mean, this offseason is, I mean, we say this about a lot of different teams, right? You can find an angle for any offseason to be maybe the most pivotal in a program's history because you're either trying to bounce back from a bad year or you want to build upon a good year, or if you have a great year, it's then, success sustaining time, right? But with this one right now, when we talk about the decision of can you afford to run it back next year or to reset, or can you afford not to in terms of running it back with coaching staff and everything like that, one of the parts of the argument of you can't afford, or you can't afford not to, right? If you want to look at that school of thought right there, some of the big thought behind it is you can't have a year where a lot of people don't show up to the ballpark, right? Because butts and seats equals money. More money means more that you can invest into the program. More money that you invest in the program, the better players you get, the better coaches you get, the better facilities you get. And then you can build upon that success as well. And that's like the one thing in the SEC for a while that teams in this league didn't maybe invest as much money into baseball or emotional equity into baseball, right? The same way that you have historically. Now you've seen an influx of money into the league. Coaching salaries have really ballooned. I mean, Tony Vitello is making $3 million a year to be the head baseball coach at the University of Tennessee. That's a lot of money. The coaching market is significantly different now in terms of what you're paying top dollar for to be in the upper echelon of this league, which is absolutely loaded year in, year out. We understand that. But this is a big offseason where he's got to do, maybe for Paul, the best recruiting job he's ever done. Because it's hard to sell 6-24. It's hard to sell 28-29. It's hard to sell the direction of a program when it went south this year, right? Yes, these high school players, they watch TV. They're on Twitter. They see stuff. They see how the season went. But you do have, there are some commits. Jack went through them, earlier in the last hour of some guys that he expects that can maybe help out sooner rather than later and maybe be an instant impact player. Going back to using the Auburn example, that they banked on a lot of those guys coming in and being impact guys from day one. You can do that. You just have to find the right guys. And that's the importance of what this offseason is going to be. Can you develop the guys that you're bringing in? Because especially with a lot of high school players, sometimes it requires a little more seasoning. Not always, there's going to be growing pains, right? Always not going to be great right out of the gate. So I completely understand that. And then as it pertains to North Carolina and the SEC, from my understanding right now, Justin, it's that the SEC is full. There's no vacancy right now. You see what the issues maybe is a conference like the Big Ten has with the amount of teams they have. coordinating travel. Now, it wouldn't be as drastic as taking a team from the West Coast, 3 time zones away from the schools that you're normally competing against every year. It's not that drastic, like, it's like Southern Cal, UCLA going to the Big Ten. But the Big Ten has its own issues because of the inflation of just teams in there, right? It's harder to do postseason stuff. It's harder to crown a true champion, right? You find yourself as a member of that league only playing half of your league in football. But we know football is the moneymaker. If the SEC were to expand, and I don't think it is, I don't think they're in the market for it. So if you're asking me if I think North Carolina finds their way in the SEC, I'm going to say no for now. But if they are looking to expand, yes, I firmly believe North Carolina and Virginia specifically are the two that they'd be the most interested in. 803-404-6100. Now we have someone on hold right now. I'll get to you in just a second once we get to the break, because for those who don't know, I sit behind the soundboard for the show every day. And when Jay's not here, it's just me back here by myself, so I can't answer the phone. But I will be glad to take that phone call in the next segment. But I wanted to get to this first before we get back into baseball, because it's great offseason discussion. In The Athletic, they produce great content, right? I love what they do. A lot of great writers. And for the college football offseason, they were all different writers at The Athletic were tasked with different rankings, right? Because now we are in the 25th year of the 21st century. So now we can start doing cool things like ranking the 25 best teams in college football since the turn of the century, or the 25 best coaches and players. And that's exactly what The Athletic did. And I wanted to start off by also asking you guys the question, too, because this could be a fun exercise we can all weigh in on. We all have good memories of this wonderful sport. So we'll start off with first. Text in 803-404-6100, the Firehouse Subs text line. What's the best team you ever saw in the 21st century? In terms of the best, most dominant team. And then what's the best player you have seen in the 21st century? And we'll see if we can reach a consensus here, right? Stuart Mandel did the teams, and Bruce Feldman ranked the players. I'll go through real quick and give you just the teams that Stuart ranked. He had 25, 2006 Florida, 24, 2014 Ohio State, 23, 2016 Clemson, 22, 2010 Auburn. 21 was the 2004 Auburn team, very underrated. Despite not winning the national championship, that team was loaded. The 2000 Oklahoma Sooners at 20, the 2002 Ohio State Buckeyes at 19, the 2015 Alabama team at 18, 17, the 2008 Florida team, 16, the 2011 Alabama team, 15, the 2012 Alabama team. There's a lot of Alabama on this. 14, 2019 Ohio State, 13, 2005 Southern Cal, the Jameis Winston-led 2013 Florida State team at 12, the 2023 Michigan National Championship team, controversial, at 11. At number 10, now we're in the top 10, 2000 Miami. At number 9, 2009 Alabama. Another Alabama appearance, the 2016 team at number 8. 2022 Georgia at number 7. 2018 Clemson team that demolished Alabama in the national title game at number 6. The 2004 Southern Cal team at number 5. Number 4 was the COVID year Alabama team. Number 3 was Vince Young and the 2005 Texas Longhorns. Number 2, the 2019 LSU team. And number 1, 2001 Miami. I really don't have like a gripe with this list too much. I think there's good explanation to all of them. I don't have a ton of gripes. I should say I don't have a ton. If I'm going to make some edits here to answer the question that I posed to all of you, in terms of what's the best team I've ever watched, or at least in the 21st century. Now, my college football watching days started when I was about 6 years old, which would have been 2001. So really, the world of college football that I grew up with and knowing is everything that's listed right here. And I still think that 2019 LSU team is the best team I've ever seen. That was a level of dominance we may never see again, and it happened in an era of football that is increasingly more difficult, meaning you had to win multiple games in the postseason to win a national championship. They went 15-0, and as loaded as that 2001 Miami team was, and trust me, that Miami program was an NFL factory for a couple of years. That 2001 team specifically was just unstoppable. But I went in and just did the math on that 2019 LSU team's national championship run. And I did the math on their margin of victory against the AP polls, the final AP polls, top 10. So they beat 4 teams in the AP final top 10, and they beat them by an average margin of 23 points. That's insane. To beat 4 final top 10 teams, basically considering that's almost half the field, is impressive on its own. Even if you won all of them by 1 point on a last-second field goal from 60 yards, right? It's all very impressive. But doing so by more than 3 touchdowns is insane. And that offense was dominant. And Joe Burrow was great that year, too. I mean, we may never see. We might see, just because there's more college football games played now with the invention of a 12-team, probably going to be a 16-team college football playoff later on. But to see 60 touchdowns thrown in a season is remarkable. Even with a longer season, we still may never see somebody throw 60 passing touchdowns in a season. So I would make that critique right there. But if you were listening to that list and you're like, wow, I only heard Georgia on there once. Did they win 2 national titles? Did they go back to back? They did. I think this is the one omission that I think I have the biggest gripe with. And that's leaving off 2021 Georgia. And now Stewart did give a reason why he left them off the list. He says it's because of the blowout loss to Alabama in the SEC title game. And one of the things he said at the very beginning of the story, too, was that he didn't want to disqualify, or he wanted to disqualify, maybe bad losses. And there are a couple teams on this list that made it that have bad losses. Now, if I want to qualify a bad loss, I think losing to Alabama in an SEC championship game by 17 is not a terrible loss, because a lot of teams lose to Alabama in the SEC championship game. Nick Saban basically owned that building every December, every single year that he was the head coach for Alabama. So I wouldn't find that as a disqualifying loss. I am a little puzzled that he included a couple teams on there that had what I would say more disqualifying losses, because that 2014 Ohio State team lost to a 7-6 Virginia Tech team. And as great as that 2016 Clemson team was, not saying they don't deserve to be on the list, but I thought they had a more disqualifying loss against an 8-5 Pittsburgh team at home. And with that 21 Georgia team, too, they did kind of make up for that 17-point loss in Atlanta by beating them by 15 in the national championship game, the game that mattered the most. And for anybody who needs a refresher on how dominant that defense was, because that's one of the more dominant defenses we've ever seen, 3 shutouts that season in 12 games. 12 of the 15 games they played, my friends, they held opponents to less than 14 points. So those are the 2 adjustments I would make, but I'm curious to know what you guys think. What's the best team that you saw play football in the 21st century, and who's the best player that you have seen as well? In terms of player, I got an outside-the-box one for it, because I like to categorize them between quarterbacks and non-quarterbacks. Curious to hear what you guys think. We'll continue the discussion. We'll also be taking calls and texts and talking about the direction of this baseball program following their elimination from the SEC tournament in Hoover. And then at 4:30, so here in about 16, 17 minutes, Michael Sauls from the state will join us to talk about the big super regional showdown happening here in Columbia between the Gamecocks and UCLA for the right to play in the Women's College World Series. We'll do all that here in the second hour as you're listening to the Postgame Show. Coming up here in a bit, my man Michael Sauls from the state newspaper, Better Call Sauls, has answered the bat signal. He's going to call by, and we're going to talk a little South Carolina softball because there is a massive opportunity for them to make a little bit of history and punch a ticket to the Women's College World Series. There's just one big hurdle. Playing that UCLA team. Yes, UCLA is in the Big Ten now, and that might be why they might be a little underseeded. That's a team that is tops in the country in almost every important statistical category you can think of. It is going to be a tough challenge, but I think the Gamecocks are up for it. So we'll talk to Michael about that here in just a bit. Right now, discussing some of the athletics rankings for the best coaches, players, and teams of the first 25 years, the 21st century. A fun introspective look here, the history of college football, and some of you have weighed in as well. Chris says the 2001 Miami Hurricanes were the best team. He says the best player is Tim Tebow. Now, that Miami team is insane. I really don't think you can go wrong with either 2001 Miami Hurricanes or the 2019 LSU team. There's no wrong answer there. Those teams are just absolutely loaded. And Chris, thank you for this. You know I'm a sucker for a good stat here. An interesting stat, it said, began on week 15 in December 2002 for 149 consecutive NFL regular season weekends, a span of almost 9 seasons. At least one Miami Hurricane scored a touchdown, included 661 touchdowns by 33 players. That is insane. That's the type of NFL factory that Miami was for a while. They're interesting this year, too, in terms of just what they're going to be in 2025. I had Jay or Nay this question yesterday to Jay of whether or not, does Carson Beck take this Miami team to the college football playoff? He doesn't think so. Cam Ward in his 1 year did wonders, and they were a win on the road against Syracuse away from really punching their ticket, not just to the ACC title game, but to get into the college football playoff, because I believe they'd have been in if they lost the ACC title game or not. But I'm on the fence about that. I need to dig up more on the defensive side of the ball. I like what they did offensively, and they were very active in the portal. But can Mario Cristobal get them there? I'm not still 1,000% sold. Matt in Leesville says 2010 Auburn best team, and Cam Newton best player. He was a man amongst toddlers out there, unstoppable, beat us twice that year against one of our best defensive teams ever. Yeah, that SEC championship game I remember watching and thinking South Carolina had a chance because it was a close game the first meeting. I didn't foresee Auburn scoring 56 points against that Carolina defense. And I remember watching it at my dad's house in Jamestown, Tennessee, watching the SEC title game and being like, wow, there's nobody beating this Auburn team. Oregon gave it their best. And if Michael Dyer's knee was down, then they probably win that national championship game. But that 2010 Auburn team was really good. And speaking of Cam Newton, that's who Bruce Feldman has as the #1 college football player since 2000. I'll give you the top 10 here real quick. 10, Terrell Suggs at Arizona State. 9, Travis Hunter, Colorado, this past year's Heisman winner. 8, Tim Tebow. 7, Vince Young. 6, Ed Reed from that 2001 Miami team. 5, Lamar Jackson. 4, Joe Burrow. 3, Ndamukong Suh, who, best defensive player I've ever seen at the college game? Probably, because in that Big 12 title game, I think he maybe had the best defensive individual performance I've ever seen. For those who don't remember, he had 12 tackles. 7 of those bad boys were behind the line of scrimmage, and 4.5 of them were sacks. That guy was a monster. 2, Reggie Bush. 1, Cam Newton. Very, very fascinating list. It's hard to disagree with Cam either, just because of what he did in that 1 year. And I think the assessment made by Matt that he was a man amongst toddlers out there, it's definitely what it looked like. For an entire season, it looked like he was a man amongst toddlers out there. No one could tackle him. He was faster than everybody, stronger than everybody. We all know the type of arm he had, especially in the peak of his career. So, I mean, in terms of who I think the best player that I've seen was, I think Cam Newton's up there. I haven't made a decision on, I guess, who it is, but he had Bruce Feldman had Larry Fitzgerald at 11. I think I have Larry Fitzgerald in my top 5 because that guy was double team proof. And I think you could interchange Larry Fitzgerald or Devontae Smith because Devontae Smith's Heisman Trophy winning season put up video game numbers, especially considering it was a shortened season and every single game was against SEC competition. So maybe I can replace Larry Fitzgerald with Devontae Smith and kind of bite the bullet on my own appetite for nostalgia on that one. But Devontae Smith, I think, has to be in the top 5 there as well. The Ndamukong Suh put there as well. No wrong answers here. Steve says Nick Saban, 25 season best coach, no doubt. LSU undefeated 2019. Cam Newton, most dominant in play I've ever seen. So another vote for Cam Newton there. Like the guy's season alone, that was a runaway Heisman. And everybody here, I would expect, if I had to predict what the pick would be from people in Columbia, South Carolina, I think it probably would be Cam Newton, just because you saw him twice. Nobody else had to see him twice. And putting up 56 points in an SEC title game is enough to make anybody a believer, right? And it is unfortunate that his career didn't get to end the way that I think it was projecting to go. Guy's body just took a beating for too many years in Carolina. But if you want to talk about a player with maybe some of the best 4-year stretches in any pro sport, take NFL, NBA, MLB, whatever, NHL, hard to have a better 4-year pick or 4-year stretch than what Cam Newton had. It really was incredibly impressive to basically go from junior college transfer at Auburn, win a national championship undefeated, win the Heisman in a blowout race, be the NFL Rookie of the Year, then a couple of years later, take your team to a 15-1 regular season, a team that doesn't have a lot of success historically with the Carolina Panthers, and then taking them to a Super Bowl. That stretch right there is maybe some of the best we've seen from a quarterback from the college transition into the NFL that you can possibly have. And now, while unfortunately our man Alshon Jeffrey was not on Bruce Feldman's list, my man Michael on the YouTube stream says Alshon is his. And Alshon was awesome. Absolutely awesome. Loved watching his career. That was one of those guys, too, that as somebody who didn't grow up here and watch South Carolina from afar, just whenever they were really on TV, I was obsessed with watching Alshon Jeffrey play. I love receivers who can just go up there and get it, and that guy is one of the best one-on-one wide receivers in contested catch situations that I have ever seen. And that catch he had in the Super Bowl where the Eagles took down the Patriots, still, to this day, one of the greatest catches in Super Bowl history, because that was the epitome of what Alshon Jeffrey did. We call it mossing people when you just go one-on-one with somebody and you go up and get a jump ball. You can call it Jeffreying somebody too, right? Because that guy has had a unique set of athletic skills that absolutely separated him. We'll go and take a quick break. When we come back, my man Michael Sauls from the State newspaper has been covering this awesome softball run all the way up to the Super Regional, is going to help us preview the Super Regional and tell us what this Carolina team has to do to be able to go where they've never been. We'll do that as the postgame show continues. From the Wetzel's Automotive Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell. The few accidents to get to you, they're causing some issues on the roadways, starting with one on Bush River Road near I-20, Clemson Road near Longtown Road, Gervais Street at Hugh G. Street here downtown, and then two in Lexington County, one on Highway 6 at Corley Mill Road, the other at Piney Grove Road at I-26. The bat signal was thrown up, and the bat signal was answered. Welcome back into the postgame show. Elijah Campbell here with you, riding solo up until 6 o'clock. And this weekend, a potentially history-making weekend here in Columbia as the South Carolina softball team squares off against UCLA in the Super Regionals starting Friday at 1 o'clock on ESPN2 for Game 1, Game 2 Saturday at 1, and if necessary, Game 3 at our favorite time, TBD. We don't know yet. And coming on to join me right now to talk about this series and break it down a little bit, my man Michael Sauls. Time to better call Sauls, if you will. Michael, thank you for joining me as always, man. Good chatting with you. How are we doing?
I am fantastic, sir. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, and I hear you're on babysitting duty as well, too, this week. And I would like to at least confirm the house hasn't been burned down yet, correct?
Yes, the house is still standing. No one has been injured, so I'd like to keep it like that for at least another week.
For as long as humanly possible. Easier said than done, as someone who also had younger siblings who were pretty rambunctious. Yeah, easier said than done. But, Michael, go ahead and start off with a question right here, too. And it's a big one, because this was quite the turnaround for this program, for Coach Chastain Woodard's first season to take them to a super regional. I think was kind of beyond everybody's expectation. But from being around this team, what do you think is maybe the most impressive part of this type of turnaround?
Well, it's one of those things where you look at it, and I think strictly from a statistical standpoint, when you look at the stats from last year, their offense was just not great as a team. I think it's one of those things. I think they were batting like less than 300 as a team or whatever, but they ranked almost 300th in the country. They were like 250 in the 250 range, and now they're in the top 50 offensively. So I think the offense has been a dramatic turnaround, but also they've just been really good pitching-wise. Jory Hurd and Sam Gress have been really good. From the pitcher circle, not the mound. I keep saying that the past 2 weeks, from the pitcher circle. But I also think just kind of we talk a lot about culture and the buy-in. And while some of that can, reach almost cliche levels in sports, I do think what Ashley Chastain Woodard has done this year has been huge for this program. I mean, she was on, I think it was Sirius XM the other day, talking about she wanted to find players who cared as much about playing in Columbia as she does. And I think that she's found it, and it's been really cool to witness this kind of turnaround.
And when you talk about maybe the cultural part of it too, building a foundation, a program where everybody enjoys being around each other, like it sounds cliche, but there's real value to that, right? And I think one of my favorite things about this team is like the adopted nickname of 2-out bandits, right? Of a team that has scored 12 of their 16 runs in the regional round with 2 outs, right? Facing the ending of an inning. And that is not just a testament to maybe like a clutch gene this team might have, but I feel like that's the perfect kind of encapsulation as to how tight-knit this group seems to be.
Yeah, absolutely. First off, 2-out bandits is a phenomenal nickname to be given to a team.
Love it.
Second, I think it just kind of proves, like, I think it was Abigail Knight who was talking in the post-game presser this past weekend, just like, they ever since they got on campus in August, they've been kind of training for these high-pressure moments to where you would think a team that's not a program really, that's not necessarily used to being in these situations, wouldn't have those kind of nerves of steel, despite the fact, like you said, I mean, every single run that they scored in that regional finale came with 2 outs, all 8 of them. So, I mean, this program has really bought into everything. Coach Ashley's been preaching, and they've got nerves of steel. They really are the 2-out bandits, and all these high-pressure situations have just been nothing to them, it seems like, from the outside perspective.
Absolutely, and which is fantastic, a fantastic trait to have going into this type of opportunity where you can get yourself to Oklahoma City for the first time. But before we kind of break down that matchup, what was more impressive to you this past weekend in the regional rounds? 12 of 16 runs being scored with 2 outs, or Jory Hurd giving up only one singular hit in 8 2/3 innings?
Dude, I don't know. I think they're both equally as impressive, but honestly, being able to get that many runs with 2 outs is insane. I think, don't get me wrong, that isn't a knock at Jory Hurd. She's been phenomenal all year, and was lights out this past weekend in the regional. But being able to create offense in 2-out situations is so vital, especially at this point in the postseason. And if they can continue to do that, obviously, I would imagine that the coaching staff wants them to score runs, with 1 out or with no outs before they have to rely on just scoring exclusively in 2-out situations. But I think the fact that you can do that, and you've kind of shown that you can do that continuously throughout the season, I think that is something that will prove to be extremely useful in the rest of the postseason.
Our friend Alan Cole tweeted the other day, kind of like where UCLA ranks in most major, statistical categories, and they're seemingly top 10 in everything. Like, they're seemingly really good at everything, and it feels like their move to the Big Ten kind of ruined their schedule to the point where they could be really good and still not be a national seed. I think that probably hurt them a little bit. So you have a potentially what some would consider an underseeded UCLA team coming in here this weekend. Is there maybe an exploitable weakness that this Bruin team has that you think this specific Carolina team can take advantage of?
Man, it's one of those things where when you look at that stat sheet, nothing really pops out. I mean, they've got 4 all Big Ten first teamers. I mean, 2 are in the top 10 in home runs. One's batting .437, which is number 4 in the country with 90 hits. I mean, and then they have on the pitching side of things, you got somebody with a .247 ERA. Like, jumping off of the page, no, it really doesn't seem like there is some like big, highlight this weakness kind of deal. I think what South Carolina is going to have to do is just to not wait around offensively. We saw that a lot in the regional where, they waited till the 6th inning or the 5th inning to kind of get going on offense. When they played North Florida and Allison Benning was pitching, Benning had them almost shut out for 5 innings, and then Benning would get tired and they would get ahead of her in the count and they would get hits and get runs. So I think South Carolina's offense is going to have to step up and score earlier, get the bats going a little bit earlier, because the pitching has proven that while the bats aren't hot, the pitching can, keep a wrap on the other team's offense. So I think if South Carolina can get its bats going early, they'll have a much better shot at, beating UCLA and heading to Oklahoma City.
And finally, in terms of this matchup, what's the one thing that can get this team to the Women's College World Series for the first time, and what's the one thing that can keep them from it?
I think it's honestly what I just said. Like, I think if the offense does not get going, then they're not going to be able to beat this UCLA team. I think Ashley Chastain-Woodard talked a little bit about it in postgame in this past weekend, just kind of, but she knows that they're right there about to break through on offense, and then they're just kind of waiting around. They're hitting the ball either right at the defenders or not getting hits at all. So I think if this offense, gets hot early, they'll be good. But I also think you do need your pitching to continue to succeed. I mean, Jory Hurd and Sam Grass have been really good in the regional, but, one bad game and then you kind of throw off your rhythm for the rest of the week. And Lord knows this UCLA offense is extremely potent. So I think it's going to need a full team effort in order to beat UCLA. I mean, this is where competition takes a step up, and a program with UCLA's legacy is not going to be easy to beat.
It would be just very fitting for a first-year head coach to beat a program like UCLA, to take that school that she played at to their first-ever Women's College World Series. Like that, if we're here for the story, that's definitely a story. And you're also, you don't just cover softball, too. You did a great job with the Women's College Basketball beat this year as well. So I got to ask you, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, have you read any of Dawn Staley's book yet?
I was reading it before you called. I am on page 104
put a number
of
on
the
that
book. Page 104. I think the most interesting thing I've learned so far is that Don Staley is a fan of court TV.
Really?
There's like a 2-page, I think it's the intro to chapter 5 or chapter 4. There's 2 pages essentially dedicated to she is friends with the judge who was over the Murdaugh trial and popped in and just went to a trial that he was presiding over to watch it happen in person. And she said that in the little bit of free time that she gets, she watches court TV and she in the most Dawn Staley way ever dissects it like a basketball game.
Oh my God.
So I think that has been my favorite takeaway through the first 100 pages. I'll get back to you in the next 100 pages, see if anything else stands out.
If we get Dawn on the show, I think I would be more interested talking about her court TV takes than maybe basketball. I didn't see that coming. That is fascinating. I didn't know Dawn Staley, my mother, had anything in common until right now. So
there you go.
that is fascinating. Anything else in the summer reading list?
I'm reading this book about this tiger in Russia, and then I'm reading one of Stephen King's memoir on writing. So we're focusing on the Dawn Staley book, then some tiger in Russia story, and then how to be a better writer. And then after that, we'll see what comes after that.
I love it. I'm always taking recommendations, so I had to ask. Since you're
I'll text you a list.
I love it. Michael Sauls at MC Sauls on Twitter. Make sure to follow him to keep up with everything going on with the softball team this weekend. If you can't get in front of a TV, fantastic follow for softball, women's basketball, you name it. He's Michael Sauls at the State. Michael, appreciate it as always, my man. Look forward to seeing you here real soon.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. Good stuff. Yeah, Michael's on it, man. He's on it. He's already 100-plus pages into the Dawn Staley book, and I think that's enough to me to get interested in cracking that thing open and seeing how far in it I can go. So good stuff there from Michael. We'll take a quick break, and we will round out hour number 2 because I have a rebuttal for something Mike Greenberg said in terms of a certain era in the NBA being dead. I'll tell you what that is when the postgame show wraps up its second hour. Last night, the Oklahoma City Thunder dominated the fourth quarter against the Minnesota Timberwolves. And if you're a fan of defensive basketball, I highly recommend watching those two teams play, as good as it is when it comes to defense. I know a lot of people complain about a lack of defense in the NBA, and that keeps you from watching it. If that's the case, again, let me reroute you to the two best teams defensively in the NBA, because it's going to be a really good series. But Mike Greenberg, the other day, mentioned this being a new era of the NBA, that the super team era of the NBA is dead. So before I react to it, I want to let you hear it first.
So here's the thing. The era of the super team in the NBA is totally and officially over, and to me, this is cause for celebration. To explain, let's start with the past. In the 1980s, the Celtics and Lakers combined to win 8 championships in a 9-year stretch in which at least one of them was in the finals every single year. Then came the 90s. You already know Michael Jordan's Bulls won 6 championships in an 8-year stretch, so you figured when he hung them up, parity would finally set in, but not at all. In the ensuing 24 years, the Lakers won 6 titles, the Spurs 5, the Warriors 4, and the Heat 3. That's 13% of the teams winning 75% of the championships in a 30-team league. Frankly, there was no fun in that. Suddenly now, everything is different. For the first time in league history, we're about to have our 7th different champion in a 7-year stretch, and it is going to be an unlikely suspect, however it turns out. The Timberwolves have never been to the finals. The Thunder last won the championship when they were the Seattle Supersonics in 1979. And as for the Knicks and the Pacers, in 1973, they were the champs of the NBA and ABA, respectively, and neither has won anything since. This has become a theme in the NBA, and it's a great one, because among the last 6 winners were the Nuggets and the Raptors for the first time each, and the Bucks for the first time in half a century. And in the meantime, look what's happened to recent efforts to construct super teams in Philadelphia, in Phoenix, in Brooklyn. None of them ever got out of the second round. None of them made the playoffs this year. Further, super teams tend to be old. The 6 oldest teams in the league this year were the Warriors, Celtics, Bucks, Suns, and Lakers. None of them are still in it. One of them didn't even make the play-in. So what does all this mean? It means the NBA got their rules right. They created something called the second apron. I'm not going to bore you with the details. Simply put, its goal was to create parity, and it worked. For too long, this league felt like a movie where you knew the ending before it began. Not anymore. Suddenly, it feels like a league where, as KG once said, anything really is possible. And to me, that is the best kind of league that you can.
I do agree there's a lot more parity. I just wouldn't say that the super team era of the NBA is dead, because I don't know if the super team, as we know it in modern NBA, ever really lived, right? Now you're saying Elijah, like LeBron and D. Wade and Chris Bosh was a super team. They won 2 titles. They got beat twice, too, by teams that were just better all-around basketball teams. Yeah, the Golden State Warriors, when they had Kevin Durant, along with the team that previously, before acquiring him, won 73 games in a season, yeah, I would call that a super team, right? And yeah, they won theirs. They did what they did before losing to the Toronto Raptors. So you have those examples. But really, the NBA is not that hard to figure out, especially in this newer era where we're about to have our 7th new champion, or 7th different champion in a 7-year stretch, something that we have never seen in this league before. It's that the principle of the best overall team with the best role players wins, not just the best stars, right? We can confuse stars with players needed to win championships. Joel Embiid's a star. Paul George is a star. Those guys aren't winning championships. James Harden's been a star for a while, not winning you a championship, not getting you close. Really, what matters, and when you look at the examples of the super teams that we'd call them, I think what Mike Greenberg may be referring to are more dynastic teams, right? And I think a couple of the Hall of Fame players from those Celtics and Lakers teams were Hall of Famers just because they were on those teams, right? And that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that, right? Like if Manu Ginobili played for the Sacramento Kings, he's probably not a Hall of Famer. If we're talking about that Spurs dynasty, I get it. But in the era of super teams, I consider to be the teams that try to pair 2 or 3 all-stars, right? But even those teams that did do that and made it to the finals got beat. The first LeBron team in Miami got beat by a Dallas Mavericks team that was 10 deep. That may be the deepest team in NBA history in terms of just having 10 guys that are really good at basketball and all contributing almost equally. And then pair that with what Dirk Nowitzki did that summer as well. But the common denominator that you're seeing with all the teams that are winning titles now is they have great role players. Players who not just buy into maybe not scoring 20 points, but guys who embrace that role of being a good rebounder or just maybe being a defensive ace or a facilitator on offense. You have guys that buy into that role, and that's a part of all team sports. The teams that are buying in and have the best role players in the NBA this year are the teams that's winning. That's good for the league. Headlines, next. From the Wetzel's Automotive Traffic Center, I'm Elijah Campbell with a few accidents to get to you. They're causing some issues on the roadways this afternoon. We've had an increase from the last hour, starting with one on Bluff Road at Highway 48 near Beltline Boulevard, Bush River Road, if I can speak, near I-20, Gervais Street at Hugh G. Street here downtown, Hardin Street near US 76 and Devine, Highway 6 at Corley Mill Road, I-20 eastbound at South Carolina 277 near exit 73, 77 northbound at Forest Drive near exit 12, and lastly, one on US 321 at US 21 in North Main Street. 2 hours down, 1 hour to go here on Wednesday's show. Welcome back into the Postgame Show. If you're just now tuning in and you're like, wow, I don't hear Jay Phillips. Well, he's not here today. He won't be here tomorrow either. But I'm Elijah Campbell, and I'll take you all the way up to 6 o'clock, and it's time for the 5 o'clock news. We'll start this bad boy locally, and we'll do that with the ending of the Gamecocks baseball season. They had their first-round SEC tournament game yesterday in Hoover, and the season ends kind of the way it went for most of the year, especially in SEC play, with an 11-3 loss to Florida in Hoover, essentially ending the Gamecock season with a losing season, the first one since 1996, and the 6 regular season SEC wins, the lowest since the school joined the Southeastern Conference in 1992. And I mentioned earlier that this game was kind of a microcosm of what we've seen from this baseball team this year. In the first hour of the show, I kind of likened it to maybe like a bingo card, right? Where if you look at all the things that have plagued this baseball team this season, you put them on a bingo card. We almost filled that sucker up last night, right? There's a lot that we've seen this year. You give up 10 or more runs, check. Strand 10 runners on base, check. Have an ERA over 9 in the last 3 innings of the SEC game, check. Commit multiple errors, check. It was a Murphy's Law season for this baseball team. And Paul Mainieri last night after the game, from the sound of it here, feels like he would agree with that sentiment.
Well, I thought we'd have a tough game today. Obviously, Florida's got outstanding players, and got off to a start. They were bases loaded, nobody out in the first inning, and only could get 1 run out of it. And they turned around and hit the 3-run home run, and after that, a couple more home runs. And we had opportunities, just couldn't capitalize on them. So in the end, it's kind of the story of our season, really. The other team hit home runs. We didn't hit any or haven't hit many. And, we left a lot of runners on base. Ultimately, the better team won.
Definitely a discouraging season for a lot of fans around here. And we started a poll here earlier this morning. Terry and I were talking about it, trying to get maybe the pulse of where the fan base is right now in terms of the future of this program. And Jordan Kay from the state newspaper did report and confirm that this coaching staff will be running it back next year. And we've talked ad nauseum on these airwaves about how expensive it would be to cut bait with this coaching staff right now. And it can be really hard to make yourself competitive instantly if you do that. So we asked our followers on Twitter at 1075thegame. It's pinned, so up to the top of the profile. Now that the season is over, how do you feel about the baseball program? A, needs total reset now. B, disappointed but patient. Or C, patient for now. 72%, so a pretty overwhelming amount of the 230 votes say need a total reset now. A lot of people feel that way. I know that is a pretty popular sentiment, even despite some of what the financial hurdles to doing a total reset right now would be. That's just not the position that they're at, and it's discouraging for everybody involved. I know it definitely is for the players, a very frustrating season, especially for those who have been there for a couple of years, right? I feel bad for someone like Ethan Petrie, who was on some really good teams here and has put up some incredible numbers himself and has etched himself into the history books as one of the best sluggers in the history of this program. And to have his career in a Gamecock uniform end the way it did with the season that it was, especially with him not being able to be out in the field for a large chunk of the last part of the season, it's very disappointing. Paul talked a little bit more about it last night in terms of being disappointed in the season that was in 2025 because there's nothing else you can do about it now. It's over. You can't change it. But he says he's not discouraged with the future.
Yeah, it was a tough year. I'm not used to these kind of seasons, quite frankly. And, it got off to a rough start when we lost what we thought was going to be our Friday night starter before the season began. And Eli Jerzenbeck got hurt in preseason, and then shortly after that, Nolan Naraki, we thought would be our second baseman, and hit a bunch of home runs. It was really never himself, and now he's had knee surgery. And then you look at Thomas LaCroix, who broke his thumb the second inning of the first game of the year, never really swung the bat the way that he could, and then when he hurt his hip, he was out for the year, and then, of course, the last month, without Petrie. So I'm not making excuses. It's just reality. We didn't have the depth to overcome some of those things. I'm an optimist by nature, and I thought, that we would have the, what it took to compete in this league. Obviously we didn't, the way the season went. But it hasn't, I'm disappointed but not discouraged. We're working really hard in recruiting. We've already lined up some really, really good players for next year through the junior college ranks. We have a few guys in the freshman class the previous staff had recruited that we're real excited about. And then we're anxious for the transfer portal to open on June 2nd. And we're obviously going to need a lot of players there. We've recruited already a really outstanding high school class of 2026. So I think the future is bright for our program. And, like I said, I'm disappointed about this year, but I'm not discouraged about the future. We're just going to keep rolling up our sleeves and working hard at it, and hopefully we're going to be a lot better next year.
The Gamecocks finished with a 28-29 record, and if you count the tournament loss, they were 6-25 against SEC competition. Moving on with the 5 o'clock headlines here, we have a verdict on the tush push, and it lives. This is from ESPN. Even the most powerful figures in the NFL were unable to stop the tush push. A proposed ban of the tush push play that the Philadelphia Eagles have popularized did not receive enough votes at the spring meeting Wednesday in Minnesota. Before the vote, retired Philadelphia Eagles center Jason Kelce and team owner Jeffrey Lurie spoke to the owners to lobby for the merits of keeping the play. Lurie made an impassioned speech in defense of the play that lasted close to an hour, sources told ESPN's Seth Wickersham. So there was talk. The Green Bay Packers were the team that introduced this, which, to editorialize a little bit, thought was a little bit of a weenie move. I mean, if anybody can do the tush push, right? I mean, this is not some like secret formation that only the Philadelphia Eagles know how to do. You have a quarterback that's big, you can do it. Just get somebody behind him and push him at the line of scrimmage and win the battle up front. And it's not automatic either. It feels automatic, but it has been stopped before. It's just very effective. So banning the play feels kind of weak. Almost kind of feels like the NCAA banning the slam dunk in the 60s when Lou Alcindor was putting his armpits in the rim all the time and UCLA was winning a bunch of titles. Kind of what it felt like to me, right, was the backlash for this play, especially considering the NFL has released their data on injuries during the tush-push play, and they concluded that there were none. So statistically speaking, it's a safe play from an injury standpoint, right? And that was one of the pushbacks that a lot of teams have had on the tush-push play, is that it might not have been safe. But the data didn't necessarily reflect that, right? So for now and forever, unless they decide to put this bad boy up to a vote next year, I don't know if that's something they'd be interested in doing. But the tush push gets to live on. We've also got some more news coming out of the NFL meetings, because Jay and I talked about this a little bit. We talked about college football playoff and their seeding and their format maybe changing to reflect a more straight seeding type bracket, right? Where we saw in college football this past year, teams like Boise State and Arizona State got buys in the college football playoff because they were two of the four highest ranked conference champions, leaving teams with better records and better resumes to have to play in the first round. In the NFL, it's kind of like that, where you can win a division. If you win the division, you automatically get to host a playoff game. If you win a bad division and you win it with, say, a 9-8 record or a 10-7 record, you just host that playoff game in the wild card round. Well, the Detroit Lions this past year, or here in the last few months, have proposed a playoff format change that would make it straight seeding. Yes, you could still win your division at like 9-8 or 10-7 and still make the playoffs, but you wouldn't necessarily be hosting a game, right? To maybe avoid a scenario like my beloved New Orleans Saints faced the year after they won the Super Bowl, where they had a fantastic season, just missed out on winning the division, and I believe they won 12 games that year. It might have been 11 or 12. I think it was 11. I think they went 11-5 and had to go play at 7-9 Seattle in the wild card round of the playoffs after Seattle beat St. Louis, the artist formerly known as the St. Louis Rams, in the last week of the regular season to win that division. That was a very bad division that year, and the Seahawks were the beneficiary of the bad division because they got to go into the playoffs with 7 wins. And the rest we know is history because Marshawn Lynch may or may not have caused an earthquake in Seattle the night they played, and New Orleans was one and done. The Lions were facing a similar situation this year. If you guys recall, they were 15-1, and I believe Minnesota was 14-2, and those two teams were playing for the division title in the last week of the season. Meaning if Detroit lost, or Detroit was also 14-2. Yeah, I misspoke. Both teams 14-2, playing against each other in the last week of the regular season. And if Detroit were to have lost that game against Minnesota, they would have had to play on the road with a 14-3 record. Minnesota lost that game, ultimately, and they had to go to Arizona to play the Los Angeles Rams, which, because of the wildfires, they couldn't play the game in Los Angeles. But anyway, they would have had to have gone to L.A., with the format as it is, to play a team that won about 2 fewer games than they did. So the Lions proposed a reseeding for the playoffs. That was withdrawn today. This is from Brooke Pryor at ESPN.com. Quote, the Detroit Lions withdrew their proposal to reseed the NFL playoffs just before league meetings resumed Wednesday. In an effort to keep late-season games more competitive, the Lions had proposed bylaw that would guarantee only the division winner in each conference with the best record a home playoff game. The rest of the playoff field would have been seeded strictly by record. So, going into next year, there will be no changing in a format or the way this thing is seeded. It'll be the way it's traditionally done. So the Lions' proposal didn't even get to a vote. And lastly, well, 2 more things. The NBA just announced Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I've had a hard time speaking today. It's crazy. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was named the NBA's MVP. Now, fantastic season by SGA, the leading scorer on the best team. The Thunder won 68 games this year. Very hard thing to do. At 68-14, he was clearly the best player on that team and put up some really good numbers. I mean, he led the league. He won a scoring title as well. Led the league with 32.7 points per game. Also averaged 6.4 assists, 5 rebounds, almost 2 steals, and he averaged, as a guard, an entire block per game. Defensively, the guy is awesome. Everybody on that team is awesome defensively, and he put up a really good night last night as the Thunder beat up on the Minnesota Timberwolves in the first quarter of Game 1. They have a 1-0 lead. And another NBA news tonight, not Celtics and Knicks, that one's over. Knicks take on the Pacers at the Garden tonight in Game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals. That's going to come up in Elijah versus the Internet because Jay's not here. So we will be picking that game in the last segment of the show. And then lastly, we'll give you some updates from Hoover. Earlier today, it was the game that's supposed to be played last night between Texas A&M and Mississippi State. Moved around because of some weather, but A&M keeps their postseason hopes alive. They dismantled the Bulldogs 9-0 in the game today, so they got the action started off in Hoover with a win. And a crazy game happening right now in Game 2 of the day. Right now, Tennessee in the bottom of the 7th with 2 on and 2 out leads Alabama 11-6. In about the 5th inning, they had a 5-1 lead, saw that lead evaporate in the top half of the 5th, and then immediately regained the lead in the bottom half of the 5th. So Tennessee looking like they're in really good shape to advance in the SEC tournament. So those are your 2 updates from Hoover right now. We'll go ahead and take a quick break. That was your 5 o'clock news brought to you by our friends, as always, at Integrated Media, the best of the best. Weather's warming up. Thinking about an outdoor TV system. Those are the guys to help you out, or really anything around the house when it comes to entertainment. Integrated Media, they're your dudes. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue our discussion of the South Carolina Gamecock baseball season, looking back on one of the more disappointing seasons in the history of the program, and looking forward to seeing how this team can get back to the standard that we all have for this baseball team. Postgame Show continues after this. 803-404-6100. That is the phone number to call in or text in on the Firehouse Subs text line. Want to give a quick shout out to Andy here. We'll go to him right away. He held on patiently through that first segment, talking Gamecock baseball, reflecting on this season, looking ahead to what's next for this program. Andy, thanks for calling, good sir.
Oh, thanks, man. No problem. Something that I've thought for a while. Paul Manieri, if I messed up his name, he sounds like a drug rep that's wanting to sell you this wonderful drug, and then he will also tell you the long list of side effects that it has. So I'm like, that's my analogy with it, and that's pretty big stones not to change any of your staff, because there's if we're sitting here like this or somewhere close next year, there's no excuse, nothing that you can say. So that's my point. I'm willing to see what happens, but this cannot stand. We have too proud of a past to stay at this level. And with this same staff, I didn't think it was the best step, but we will see. I'll hang up and listen. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you for your call, Andy. And I'm a sucker for a good analogy. And if you've noticed in those commercials that you alluded to, usually the side effects are all really bad, and sometimes they end in death. And usually while they're reading off those unpleasant side effects, it's showing B-roll footage of people dancing and having a great time. I think that's probably intentional to get your mind off of what those side effects possibly are. It's in every one of those commercials. But yeah, and to your analogy right there too, I mean, I see it. I see what you mean. I think in Paul's position, I don't know what else you say. You know, you kind of have to drum up support as much as you can, because Andy, being at the ballpark during the LSU series, to say that it was an empty stadium wouldn't be far from the truth. It wasn't the best of environments, and you could tell the fans voiced their displeasure by not filling the stadium up. And we talked to Paul about that when he was on with us on Monday, kind of about the lack of attendance, and he agreed that the performance and the product that was put out on the field doesn't really justify fans spending hard-earned money to come out to the field and watch what they've seen this year. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, Florida came in here, had to play a doubleheader, and in those two games outscored South Carolina 30-3. Like, that's a blowout in football, right? You wouldn't want to pay good money, your hard-earned money, to go watch the football team at Willie B get beat 30-3 by Florida. You definitely don't want to do it in baseball unless you're a glutton for punishment. So I don't think anybody is, nobody's, questioning the fan base for not showing up. Don't blame them at all. And if you're in Paul's position, I think the thing to do is to try to say what you can and do what you can to get that support back, right? Because we know here that this community, this town, this fan base supports the baseball team. I've never been in a market where college baseball is cared about more. You know, I've never lived in Baton Rouge, so I can't speak to that. But as somebody who grew up in the SEC footprint and really close to one SEC town and living in another, and one SEC town, living in Nashville and working there professionally at the height of Vanderbilt's powers, they don't care about it as much as South Carolina does. That's one thing that became very evident to me very early on in my time here, is how big of a deal college baseball is. And I love that. It's what makes it so special here, right? So the standard is always going to be high, and a season like what you just had is the type of season that SEC programs that don't care about the sport normally have, right? Like, you weren't as bad as Missouri, but we've oftentimes stated here there are barriers to Missouri's baseball success. It's just not in the best location. It's in a pro sports state where there are two pro baseball teams that do pretty well for themselves in that state. So there are barriers there. That's not the case here. And he knows that a way to bring back that type of support is to load up on talent and early next season make a statement enough to where you can prove to people around here that this team is worth buying into emotionally and financially. So yeah, I definitely get the analogy. I love a good analogy. He kind of has to say that, right? He has to be able to give people at least some type of feeling in any way that you can, and no matter how futile the efforts might be, because as reflected in the poll that we had earlier today, where 72% of over 200 voters in there say that we need to press the reset button. People aren't excited about the baseball program right now, and they're not excited about the direction, and nor should they be. You went from this time 13 months ago looking at hosting a regional to firing the head coach, getting a new one, and then immediately having the worst season in school history since 92, since you joined the league in 92, and your first losing season in 96. So, yeah, it's pretty bleak, man. And the way it ended last night, too, I think is probably, I don't want to say poetic. I don't like using that word here, but it was fitting, right? Everything that plagued you in the regular season showed its eerie head in your final game. Errors, walks, giving up runs late, bullpen, putting up a crooked number late in the game, leaving 10 runners on base. That was a huge issue early in the season. You didn't see enough progression with this team throughout the year to make yourself feel excited about the direction of the program. You have a couple players that you really need to retain to try to bring that excitement back. Like, we think the excitement's not there now. It's definitely not going to be there if some of your better freshmen hit the transfer portal, if the few bright spots you had on this team aren't coming back. Because if you listened in the first hour, I kind of laid out how Auburn and Georgia were able to turn their programs around within a year. One team did fire their head coach and their coaching staff and brought in Wes Johnson. That was Georgia. And they retained a lot of their best talent. And Charlie Condon ended up becoming the best player in college baseball after spending a year at Georgia. He was a redshirt sophomore last year and only had 1 year of SEC play underneath his belt. But he made this massive jump, right? What Wes Johnson did and what that new coaching staff did helped unlock that version of Charlie Condon, and that made Georgia very successful last year. They hosted a regional. And this year, Condon's not there anymore, but they're the number one team in RPI, and they've set themselves up to be able to make a postseason run this season. Auburn kept their coach, right? Butch Thompson was the head coach there last year. They had an abysmal season, but one of the main, common denominators here between Georgia in 24 and Auburn this year was that those guys that came back progressed. They got better. Ike Irish got a lot better. He went from being just one of the better hitters on a not so good baseball team to a guy that set himself up to potentially be an All-American this year. Made an incredible turnaround. And I think the retention of the bright spots is a huge part, especially when it comes to keeping fan engagement alive, right? Obviously, it's discouraging to only win 6 games in the SEC in a season. It's more discouraging when you lose more than you win for the entirety of the season and then don't even bring back the bright spots, and now you've got a completely new roster with a bunch of question marks and no one knows how good you're going to be. But if you retain your Bo Hollinses, your KJ Scobies, Nathan Hall, Nolan Naraki, Henry Kazmar, a lot of the guys that I think people here still feel pretty positive about, if you're not able to retain those guys, it's a nightmare. You're able to retain them, and then they make a jump from 1 year to the next, and they progress. That's a less of a burden that you have for the transfer guys and freshmen to be impact players right away. It becomes less important, right? Still important, just not as important as if you don't bring those guys back. And on the other hand, bringing those guys back helps at least know some of the players, have some familiarity, because when people spend their hard-earned money to come to these games, they want to know who they're watching. And retaining some of the bright spots from this year's team can maybe help with that from an attendance standpoint and from an enthusiasm standpoint to start next season. Massive offseason for this program. And starting on June 2nd, I think we're all going to be on transfer portal watch and be closely looking at how they can right this ship and get this program from the basement back to the penthouse where we all want it to be. Drive around the SEC. We'll give you some score updates from Hoover. Look at the rest of the bracket. And there's an SEC college basketball player suing the NCAA for a 5th year of eligibility. And if he wins, it's a pretty significant impact on the future of college athletics. We'll discuss that in the Drive Around the SEC. From the Wetzel's Automotive Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell with many accidents here to get to you. They're causing some issues on the roadways this afternoon. So let's start with one on Bluff Road at Highway 48 near Beltline Boulevard, Clemson Road at South Carolina 555 at Faro Road, Hardscrabble Road near Clemson Road, Hardin Street near US 76 and Divine, a pair of them on I-20, one eastbound at South Carolina 277 near exit 73, the other westbound at Bush River Road near exit 63. We'll have one on I-77 northbound at Forest Drive and exit 12, Old Orangeburg Road near Old Barnwell Road and Land of Lakes Boulevard, and lastly, one on US 321 at US 21 and North Main Street. Time to take a quick drive around the SEC, brought to you by Herndon Chevrolet. We'll go ahead and start with some updates of some games that happened earlier today. Last night, Florida's 11-3 win over South Carolina ended up being the last because they were expecting some severe weather over in the Hoover, Alabama area. So they postponed the night's game and moved it to this morning at 10:30, and that featured a Texas A&M team fighting for their postseason lives, and Mississippi State, who seemingly might have done enough to get themselves in after firing Coach Chris Lemonis. Well, today it certainly seemed as if the Texas A&M Aggies were the more desperate team. They shut out the Bulldogs 9-0 in the first game in Hoover, so they get to advance here in the SEC tournament, and we'll give you a full bracket breakdown later. And right now, a pretty wild baseball game going on right now between Tennessee and Alabama. This one has felt like it's taken forever because there have been a lot of hits. So we'll go ahead and take a look at that right now. Tennessee leading Alabama 13-6 in the bottom of the eighth. They have one runner on, no outs. Tennessee led 5-1 in the fifth inning. And then in the blink of an eye, in the top of the fifth, Alabama comes back and ties it, tying it up at 5. Then Tennessee regained the lead. Actually, they took a lead. I think Alabama took a 6-5 lead going into the bottom of the fifth, and then Tennessee's bats did what Tennessee's bats have been known to do the last couple of years. Now they lead 13-6. Again, bottom of the eighth with one on and no outs right now. So we'll go ahead and take a look at the bracket as it stands. If this result holds and the Vols win, they'll take on 1 seed Texas tomorrow. After this game, Oklahoma and Georgia will play, and then that winner will take on Vanderbilt. Florida has Ole Miss tonight. I think it's a 9 o'clock first pitch, scheduled to be 9 o'clock first pitch. The winner of that game will take on the Hogs at Arkansas, and then after Texas A&M beat Mississippi State earlier today, they advanced to play 6 seed Auburn. I believe that game is at noon tomorrow, and that winner will play Friday against 3 seed LSU. So that's your SEC tournament baseball update. In basketball, now we thought we saw the last of Zakai Ziegler at Tennessee, but like many players, it seems to be a pretty trendy thing to do. He's suing the NCAA in order to try to get a 5th year of eligibility. He's being represented by Litson PLLC and Garza Law Firm. And in a statement Tuesday, they said, quote, the NCAA's rule permitting only 4 seasons of competition within the 5-year eligibility window is an unlawful restraint of trade under federal and state antitrust laws. So this is coming from Joe Rexroad's article on The Athletic, his reporting on it. It covers Tennessee Volunteer Athletics for them. He says, quote, the lawsuit claims the 5th year of eligibility is the most lucrative for the, quote, vast majority of athletes, and that Ziegler will suffer irreparable harm without an immediate injunction allowing him to compete in the 25-26 season. Since schools are finalizing their rosters now, Ziegler intends to pursue a graduate degree after graduating this month from Tennessee with a degree in retail and merchandising management. So basically what his argument is here, this is me speaking now, that having 5 years to play 4 and getting to do that, having a red shirt, you're getting to be part of the program for 5 years, can be restricted for guys who are only there for 4 but get their degrees on time. In this article, there's a couple of more allusions to players who maybe don't get their degree in a 5-year stretch, and those guys may be rewarded for an extra year, while Zakai Ziegler graduated in 4 years. It's an interesting angle to look at. On one hand, you can say, yeah, why would he be punished? Why can't he get a grad season if he is a graduate student, right? We see grad students playing all the time, and one of my favorite examples is Benjamin Bosman's Verdonk here, getting to play as a graduate player with his while he was in law school. And there's one of the cooler stories about that team this year was balancing law school and playing basketball in the SEC. So that's kind of the angle he's taking right there. And on the other hand, the guy's played well north of 100 career college basketball games. He's seemingly been in the starting lineup at Tennessee ever since he stepped foot on campus in 2021. It does present an interesting opportunity to set some precedent, because if he takes the NCAA to court and wins, which we all know, very well talked about on this show, the NCAA does not win in court a lot. They're kind of like this year's Colorado Rockies baseball team. They might win some, but they lose most. If Zakai Ziegler does manage to win this in court and is granted a 5th year of eligibility, it is going to set precedent for guys to be able to play, and girls in their respective sports, 5 years at a university, as long as they're attending maybe a grad school program after they get their undergrad. And that can change a lot of things in college athletics, because we already saw with everybody getting the free COVID year, all of college sports getting significantly older. And if you ask any college coach, whether it be basketball, football, baseball, softball, water polo, whatever, the emphasis on recruiting shifts to try to get transfer portal players that are older and more seasoned, as opposed to solely focusing on the recruiting of high school players. That's been a big issue, right? Rick Pitino even said on a podcast during the basketball season this year that he doesn't really care much about high school recruiting, that he's just all in on recruiting the transfer portal, and because he's gotten the results, right? He had a solid first year at St. John's. They missed the tournament, but then he loaded up in the transfer portal, and a team made up with a lot of more seasoned veteran players who have made a previous stop, won the Big East, was the number 2 seed in the NCAA tournament, and had one of the best, most memorable seasons that program's had in decades. So if you're Rick Pitino, he's thinking, why would I recruit as heavily at the high school ranks, right? And a lot of coaches, they might not say it publicly, but maybe deep down inside share that sentiment. So if this happens, now that we finally kind of cycled out through the class of players who got that extra COVID year, or that extra year because of the COVID season, you saw where the average age of just the college athlete went up. If Zakai Ziegler wins this in court and is granted that 5th year, we're going to see that number stay up permanently. What that means for the future of high school recruiting, I think it's always going to be important, especially in football, basketball ranks. It's always going to be an important thing to have a really good, top-notch high school recruiting class. But the influx of older players is just going to stay around. Something we thought would just be a side effect of the COVID year will linger on permanently. And that will change how college athletics looks. So it's interesting to keep tabs on this story, paying attention to what is being ruled and why it is being ruled. Because if Ziegler wins, then college sports will be old for the rest of its existence. That's the Drive Around the SEC, brought to you by Herndon Chevrolet. One more segment to go. It's not Jay versus the internet, because Jay's not here, so he gets to take a break from losing. I will fill in for Jay Phillips, and today I get to take on the internet. We will discuss the final poll results for those games that are going on tonight, and we'll see how well I can do against you guys, because you guys are kicking Jay's butt so far in this contest. That's what we're going to do here to wrap up Wednesday's postgame show. Final few minutes of today's show. Thank you guys for tuning in and hanging out with me this afternoon. Elijah Campbell, no Jay Phillips today. He was lonely here in the studio. But thankfully, the power of friendship and having you guys tagging along made it go by a little faster. But as we've been doing for the last almost 2 weeks now, we were doing Jay Phillips versus the internet, where Jay picks against the spread or maybe a prop bet in a few sports, 3 contests a night. And the internet also picks. And by that, I mean, I just put up some Twitter polls on at 1075 The Game, and you guys vote on them, and whoever you guys vote for is the internet's pick. And so far, you guys are doing pretty good. Not a great night last night. Went 1-2, 9-9 overall. So you're still at 500. You're still at even. And that's good considering Jay Phillips, once again, has another rough afternoon. You guys both took the Timberwolves to cover. Now, that was looking good until about maybe the last 7 or 8 minutes of that game, and Oklahoma City just smothered the Timberwolves defensively. You guys both had the Hurricanes winning game 1, and I'm not going to lie to you. I'm a hockey guy, right? I love the sport of hockey. I love playoff hockey. I was convinced the Hurricanes were going to take game 1. I think they're a more complete team maybe than Florida right now, but Florida went in there and did whatever they wanted. I think it was a 5-2 game. But you guys did do a great job on predicting that Spencer Strider would be over on his hits of 3.5 in his first game back, and he got that taken care of pretty quickly. So today's matchups, I'll go ahead and read y'all's submissions first. Tonight, Eastern Conference Finals in the NBA, the New York Knicks, they're 4.5-point favorites against the Indiana Pacers. The internet's vote, 65% say the Knicks will cover that 4.5 at home, and it's intriguing because I love this Knicks team, and there's not a better crunch time player in the NBA right now than Jalen Brunson. But I really love this Pacers team, and for one big reason too is that they play to their name, right? Pacers. This is one of the fastest teams in the NBA, and they're not afraid to up the tempo by playing a little more full court pressure. I think out of all the teams in the playoffs, they have ran the most full court pressure than any team by a significant margin, right? Like 5 times more than the second most. They're not afraid to pick up full court and rush you a little bit, and they're as good at dictating tempo than anybody in the NBA right now. And the way Tyrese Halliburton's playing, the way their role players, which I've mentioned many times before in the NBA, that's how you win championships, is having better role players. I think they're good enough to keep it a one-possession game. The Knicks have done a lot of winning in one-possession games, so I think it's at least going to be within 5 points. So I feel comfortable taking the Pacers plus 4.5. So that's what I'm going to do and go Indiana to cover 4.5 points. Game 1 of the Western Conference Finals in hockey, Dallas Stars taking on the Edmonton Oilers. The internet's pick, pretty sizable win there for the Dallas Stars. 63% of you voted for the Dallas Stars to win that game tonight. And as much as I love Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, it's arguably the most exciting duo in hockey. And Connor McDavid's the best player in hockey. You get in the postseason, goaltending matters more than ever. And I believe Jake Ottinger. I believe in that guy. That he is a fantastic goaltender, having a solid season. This Stars team, too, also just loaded with skaters, guys that can just score from anywhere. I mean, Mikhail Granlund, who's like a third-line player, had a hat trick in the last round to help take care of the Winnipeg Jets. They're just too deep. Too many scoring options. They have the goaltending advantage. It's game 1 at home, and Dallas might not think of as a traditional hockey city. They get loud for that team, man. That they produce a raucous environment. So I want to trust the building. I want to trust the scoring options. And most importantly, I'm trusting the goaltending. So give me the Stars as well. I will agree with the internet on that one. And lastly, tonight, I know they're in a little bit of a weather delay right now. Hopefully they play it so it doesn't mess up our standings. But Ozzie Albies for the Atlanta Braves, over under 1.5 hits, runs, RBI. So he's just got to have more than one of any of those, right? It could be, he could have one hit, but if it's a home run, then it counts because that's an RBI and a hit. So over under 1.5 for Ozzie Albies tonight against the Nationals. And this might have been our closest vote yet. 51% say over to unders 49. That was competitive. I couldn't write that one down on my sheet until that poll finally expired. It was that close, but 51% say over. I will zig while y'all zag. I wrote down under. Ozzie Albies, I need to see more from him this year. Now, I know the Braves did an incredible job of coming back to 500 after being 8 games behind it early in the season once they dug themselves a massive hole. They've done a really good job getting back there, but Ozzie Albies has to be hitting better than 226, man. They need him to be better. I just don't think that begins tonight. They get a good Ozzie Albies. I like their chances of coming back and when Acuna's back as well, of winning that division. Thank you all for joining me again today. Brad Muller are going to join me tomorrow at 4:30 to preview the softball series with the opportunity they have on the line and a whole lot more. Thanks for joining me. Talk to you tomorrow.